So our next group is heavily under the influence of Professor Palmer. First they had to take ecology and then urban ecology and then workshop from this same guy. So they must like him. Everybody likes him, right? Doesn't everybody like Matt? Yeah. Everybody likes Matt. Come on. It's hard not to like Matt. Anyway, this group, see, I'm just talking while everybody finds their seats. That's in case you're wondering what I'm doing. There's no substance to any of this, but we do think that Matt's wonderful. So this workshop group focused on restoring healthy forests for the Healthy Communities Act, and so if you are ready, let's hear all about it.
Good morning. Thank you everyone for being here today. My name is Ashley Toombs, and I'm going to be presenting the final briefing on the Restoring Healthy Forests for Healthy Communities Act. Throughout the past 2 semesters, we've been hearing about a myriad of environmental challenges and how to best go about solving them using science, policy, and economics. However, when we're so busy being this methodical, it's easy to forget that these challenges are grounded in realities that are wreaking havoc on homes, businesses, schools, and other systems upon which everyday people depend. California's traditional fire season begins at the end of September after the long, dry summer months, which, as many of you know, have most recently been exacerbated by severe drought. By the end of this September alone, California had faced over 5,000 wildfires. One of them, the King Fire, burned for more than a month in the El Dorado National Forest. During that time, it consumed over 100 buildings and forced the evacuation of over 3,000 people from their homes. Costs for this fire are estimated to reach more than $150 million. And due to climate change, California's fire season has been ongoing incessantly for over 18 months, and there is no end in sight. However, we cannot forget that wildfires aren't happening just more severely in California, but all over the United States. This graph shows how average fire size in the United States has increased significantly over the past 25 years, and science and mapping studies have shown that the majority of these fires are occurring in the western part of the United States. Simultaneously, the total value of timber being harvested from U.S. federal forest land has decreased drastically, from a high of over $1.5 billion at the end of the 80s to a low of under $250 million in 2013. This situation has been created by changing policy and economics and allows for the implementation of the Restoring Healthy Forests for Healthy Communities Act. The Act aims to address declining timber harvests through better forest management projects and the reduction of catastrophic wildfires, which leads to the first objective of increasing timber harvests through the creation of forest reserve revenue areas in each of the 155 national forest units. The Secretary of Agriculture will determine the minimum amount of timber that has to be harvested from each of these forests and must be done and completed in a sustainable manner. 25% of the revenues that are generated from the timber harvest will be returned to local counties that contain federal forest land to support public works such as road infrastructure, schools, or police departments. There is a tight timeline for the designation of this portion of the bill, requiring that all of these designations be completed within 90 days of the enactment. Due to this pressing timeline, resource advisory committees will be formed to support in these designations, and they will continue to meet annually after the first year to reevaluate the sustainable timber yields. The second objective of the bill is to improve forest health and in turn reduce the incidence of catastrophic wildfires. As seen on this hierarchy, the Secretary of Agriculture and state governors will designate at-risk forests and high-risk areas of the federal forest. This will give the governors increased control over federal forest management, which is a complete change in how historically forest management has been completed, as it takes the control from the federal government and really puts a lot of it in the hands of state governors. The governors will also have increased control of the ability to designate timber thinning and harvesting leases, which would lead to reductions in catastrophic wildfires. Through these management changes, the policy should reduce catastrophic wildfires and in turn minimize the amount of money that the Forest Service spends every year in suppressing these fires. It should also generate increased revenue for rural counties and create value for the timber industry. It exempts the forest areas that we've been discussing from the National Environmental Policy Act's required environmental impact assessments, and it reduces federal authority over the forest, which is a fundamental departure from historic forest management, and this has the potential to lead to ambiguity and legal challenges. With such a complicated new system being put into place, and to ensure that the harvesting levels be achieved, there will be significant increases in staffing for the Forest Service upon this bill's implementation. Many of the staff will be hired at the local level because that's where the majority of fuel and hazardous reduction projects take place. The hiring will begin immediately after the bill's enactment and continue on an as-needed basis depending on the timber harvesting levels. Costs for these new staffing are estimated to be about $520 million for approximately 7,500 additional employees on top of the 33,000 current employees that the Forest Service has. It's important to remember, though, that these are just estimates of staffing levels because they will be determined ultimately at the discretion of the Secretary of Agriculture, who determines the timber harvesting levels. So with all of these moving pieces, this is how they'll come together. 90 days after the bill is enacted, the sustainable yield of timber and harvesting quotas must be determined. Within the first year, the additional staff and incoming staff need to be hired in order to implement the fuel reduction projects. And over the long term, the sustainable yields and staffing needs will need to be reviewed and adjusted on an ongoing basis. The program implementation for this bill has definite increased levels in staffing and an increase in forest management. So staffing and operational costs are approximated at $699 million, which also includes the payments that are expected to go out to the rural counties. Alternatively, timber sales are expected to generate approximately $372 million. And to put this into perspective, the 2014 U.S. Forest Service budget had a total of $6.3 billion, of which 1/3 was spent completely on suppressing catastrophic wildfires. So if this legislation is enacted and carried out, the incidence of these catastrophic wildfires should be greatly reduced, allowing the Forest Service to better use that money for forest management and healthy forest projects. With such large increases in staffing and a complex budget, it is vital, though, that the changes from this bill be accurately tracked. The Forest Reserve revenue areas and timber quotas need to be designated within 90 days of the bill's implementation. The timber harvest and sales, which have been measured by the Forest Service for decades, need to continue being tracked to ensure that they are increasing. The Forest Service currently monitors over 60 forest health metrics, and that needs to continue. For example, this picture shows ponderosa pines that are evenly spaced without low-hanging limbs, which are two indicators of forest health and resiliency against forest fires. All personnel and new personnel must be hired pretty quickly after the bill started to begin the immediate implementation of the fuel reduction projects. However, all of these metrics won't matter if the overall goals of the bill aren't achieved. The Restoring Healthy Forests for Healthy Community Act aims to generate increased revenue for rural counties. It also aims to protect the health of the national forest and to reduce federal control over national forest lands. And this is so important in a time when catastrophic wildfires are becoming a serious and increasingly serious issue for us. This bill really aims to reduce their incidence and to return revenue to the rural counties that need it the most. So I thank you for your time and invite your questions. Yes, Alex.
Thanks so much, Ashley. That was a really wonderful presentation. I thought it was really interesting that you seek to reduce the federal control and put it more into the hands of the local officials in charge. And so I was just curious about the staffing. Who will be in charge of hiring all this new staff that you are seeking, and whether there are certain areas that are lacking the capacity, and if those will be targeted to hire more local staff capable of measuring success in achieving the goals?
Okay, so
Thanks.
that's a great question, and it's definitely complicated, Alex. I think the first important thing to point out is that the bill is really what aims to reduce the federal control. Not me or my team personally. That's one of the things that was specifically mandated in the bill, and it's a big component of it. So the staffing changes, because they are so big, they're really going to happen at the national, regional, and local levels. So there'll be different systems that are put in place and sort of using the hierarchy that the forest system already uses for hiring. But the majority of these staffing changes will really occur at the local level, where these fuel reduction and forest management projects take place. So a lot of that is going to be happening actually within each national forest unit.
Other questions? We have a professor question back there. This should be interesting.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So I have two questions, but I'll let you choose which one you want to answer. One is, how do they decide what a sustainable timber harvest is in the bill?
Okay, so the same way that a lot of us learned in ecology, they're looking at the amount of, they're using science and scientists to look at the amount, just like you, to look at the amount of...
I might come up with a different number than they do, though.
Almost positive you would. But to look at the amount of timber that can be harvested within these forests in an ongoing manner, sort of sustainably, as we've learned as the definition of the word sustainable.
So, and the second question relates to that, is if the sustainable harvest is pictured to be what it is, it's shocking to me that the number for increased revenue that is projected is only $350 million. That's something like 40 to 50,000 hectares of land. That's it.
No, and I think that's
that's not even at sustainable harvest levels. So
well, you're
like
actually correct, and we thought about that. What we did was we used a really conservative estimate for our numbers for the amount of timber harvest. The $372 million is only using 50% of the sustainable yield, so 50% out of 100%. And that was because the bill actually mandates in the legislation that minimally 50% of the sustainable yield is what must be harvested. So we use that minimum number to be conservative in our estimates of actual revenues that would be generated by the bill.
Okay.
With that, let's
Thank you.
So let me make a point that I think our briefer actually did, which is that this group really wasn't crazy about this bill. And very often we're asked to implement programs that mix the good with the bad, let's put it that way. And the job in this workshop is not to come up with a policy perspective on the bill, but in fact to figure out a way to make it real and to make it work as well as we can. And I think the group did an excellent job, and it was a terrific briefing.